Welcome to the Riddle of the Regatta Sabotage, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Lost Cases of Young Sherlock, before Baker Street, playing in the year 1874. Though many of my own chronicles concerning Mr. Sherlock Holmes are well known, a remarkable cache of documents has recently come to light, offering a glimpse into his earliest endeavors. These papers, discovered within the archives of Victor Trevor's ancestral estate, comprise letters exchanged between Holmes and Trevor, Trevor's own journals, and even some of Holmes's annotated university notebooks. They paint a vivid picture of the years 1872 to 1877, a formative period when his extraordinary deductive talents first began to blossom, long before our shared adventures in Baker Street. These are indeed the lost cases of young Sherlock, before Baker Street, revealing the nascent genius tackling challenges that sharpened his singular mind. From this unique collection, I shall now relate an intriguing affair that tested his abilities early on. I speak of the riddle of the Regatta Sabotage. Chapter 1. The spring term at Cambridge, usually a period of pleasant scholarly pursuit and growing excitement for the annual boat race, found its customary harmony disturbed. The usual gentle murmur of the River Cam and rhythmic splash of oars were overshadowed by a rumor spreading with unsettling speed through quads and common rooms, trouble at the boathouses. Professor Alastair Finch, our esteemed classics don, brought the matter to my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and his university associate, Victor Trevor. I found them in Holmes's rooms, a space both chaotic and stimulating. When Finch arrived, his usual cheerfulness clouded with concern. His familiar tobacco scent preceded him, mingling with the chemical odors of Holmes's latest experiment. Professor Finch's voice, usually so resonant in the lecture hall, was hushed. "Holmes, Trevor," he began gravely, "a most distressing incident. Our college's prized racing shell, it has been deliberately damaged. Sabotaged, I fear," Professor Alastair Finch replied. We accompanied Professor Finch to the riverbank. A chill wind whipped across the grey cam, making tethered punts knock softly. The usually bustling boathouse was unnaturally quiet. Inside, the air felt heavy with dismay as a small group gathered around the sleek, eight-oared shell, its polished cedar hull gleaming in the dim light from dusty windows. Standing apart, fists clenched, was a young man whose taut expression bespoke immense strain. This, I soon learned, was Mr. James Strachan, coxswain of the crew. He gestured towards the boat, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Look here, sir. The oarlocks filed almost through. And this damnable sticky mess smeared along the keel. It would have crippled us mid-race," said Mr. James Strachan. Holmes, without a word, knelt for a closer inspection. His keen eyes, familiar to me, scanned the marred oarlocks, then the viscous residue on the hull. He touched it lightly, sniffed his fingers, his brow furrowed in concentration. The only sounds were the cam, lapping gently against the wooden piles, and Strachan's ragged breathing. He rose, brushing a fleck of something from his coat. "Professor," he began, his tone analytical, "this is no mere undergraduate prank. The work on these oarlocks shows a degree of precision, a calculated malice. The substance, too, is peculiar. It seems designed not merely to slow, but to adhere and accumulate debris," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Precisely why I sought you out, Holmes. And you, Trevor. This calls for the particular talents of the Dilettante Detectives Club. The university cannot afford a scandal, but nor can we allow such villainy to pass unchecked," answered Professor Alastair Finch. I recalled the Dilettante Detectives Club, as Finch termed it. This small, informal group, co-founded by Holmes and Trevor, applied logical principles to matters often overlooked by conventional authorities. Even in these early days, it stood as a testament to Holmes's burgeoning reputation. Victor Trevor, a sturdy, thoughtful young man, nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the damaged shell. Indeed, Professor. The effort here is disproportionate to simple rivalry. Someone possessed not only the intent, but also specific knowledge, and perhaps a unique material. Victor Trevor answered. Professor Finch then elaborated on a critical point, his voice dropping almost to a whisper, though the boathouse was now empty save for ourselves and Strachan, who hovered nearby, his anxiety palpable. There are rumors, gentlemen, that this shell incorporates a revolutionary new hull design, lighter, faster than anything seen before. Its specifics are a closely guarded secret. Its loss, or rather, its incapacitation, would be a severe blow not just to our college's pride, but potentially to certain advancements. Professor Alastair Finch replied. Holmes's eyes lit with that familiar spark of intense interest I knew so well. The prospect of a complex problem, veiled in secrecy, was clearly irresistible to him. He addressed Strachan directly, his voice now brisk and businesslike. Mr. Strachan, I should like to speak with you at length regarding this innovative design and the routines of your crew. Every detail, however insignificant it may seem, could prove vital, deduced Sherlock Holmes. As we left the subdued boathouse, the grey cam reflecting the overcast sky, I sensed this was the opening act of an intricate and unsettling drama. Holmes, I felt certain, was already piecing together the first fragments of the puzzle that had so rudely disturbed our university's peace. Holmes acted swiftly after Professor Finch's earnest appeal and Trevor's astute guess about the sabotage's complexity. The very next morning, I accompanied Holmes and Miss Elena Whitfield from our Dilettante Detectives Club to the embattled college's boathouse. A chill mist clung to the cam. Inside the vast, timbered boathouse, damp air resonated with water lapping against wooden piles. River mud, old varnish, and an indefinable metallic scent hung heavy. A young man awaited us. He was compact and wiry, an anxious frown deeply etched on his brow. This was Mr. James Strachan, coxswain of the unfortunate crew. His dark, intense eyes flickered between Holmes and the damaged racing shell. The shrouded boat lay upon its trestles like a wounded creature. Mr. Strachan's voice, though quiet, seemed to cut through the boathouse gloom. Mr. Strachan, I presume, my colleague, Dr. Watson, and this is Miss Whitfield. We are here at Professor Finch's request, a most regrettable affair, replied Sherlock Holmes. He nodded curtly. His voice was tight with suppressed emotion. Regrettable is a mild term, sir. It's a disaster. We were the favorites, or we were, responded Mr. James Strachan. Indeed. Tell me, Mr. Strachan, about this shell. I understand it had a new design, something of a secret, declared Sherlock Holmes. Strachan's gaze turned possessive as he gestured towards the boat. More than new, Mr. Holmes. Revolutionary, lighter, stronger. A carefully guarded innovation. We kept her hidden as much as possible. Only the crew and our boatmen truly knew her design, Mr. James Strachan said. Holmes stepped closer to the shell, his keen eyes scanning its form. He ran a gloved finger along a section of the hull. He paused, his expression sharpening. Miss Whitfield, always practical, produced a small notebook. May we examine the damage more closely, Sherlock Holmes said. Strachan nodded, his jaw tight. Holmes moved with quiet intensity, going first to the oarlocks. I heard the faint scrape of his fingernail against metal. He peered at them through a small lens he took from his pocket. Observe, Watson, Miss Whitfield. These fittings haven't been crudely smashed. See here, the scoring is precise. It's designed to weaken the metal so it would fail under race strain, not before. This suggests knowledge of metallurgy, or at least a very patient hand, replied Sherlock Holmes. He then moved along the hull. His attention was drawn to an area near the waterline. He crouched, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a moment he pointed. His voice held a note of intrigued discovery. And this is most curious. I leaned in, and Miss Whitfield did too. A dark, sticky substance was smeared thinly across a section of the polished wood. It looked like tar, but had a peculiar sheen. The smear was not large, but its placement seemed deliberate. Miss Whitfield's voice was crisp and analytical. It appears to be some sort of sticky compound, Mr. Holmes. I imagine it's quite tacky, though I won't test it without proper equipment. It would certainly create drag subtle, yet significant. Miss Elena Whitfield answered. She carefully scraped a tiny sample into a glass vial from her satchel. Her movements were precise and efficient. Strachan stared at the substance, his face paling. I saw nothing of that when we put her away last night. We wiped her down thoroughly. Who would do such a thing? And why? Responded Mr. James Strachan. His voice trembled slightly with a mix of disbelief and fury. Holmes replied, his tone reassuring yet firm. The who and why are precisely what we intend to discover, Mr. Strachan. This was no random act of undergraduate mischief. The perpetrator knew your boat's value and had access to an uncommon material. Tell me of your rivals. Was there any unusual interest in your boathouse or team preparations? Deduced Sherlock Holmes. Strachan described the usual college rivalries. However, none seemed to justify such malicious and calculated sabotage. He spoke of the intense pressure to win and the betting that surrounded the event. Yet, he could not point to any specific person with both the motive and the means. Holmes mused, more to himself than to us. His gaze drifted towards the grey light, filtering through the boathouse doors. The river itself may hold some answers. Those who often visit its banks may see more than they realize. Miss Whitfield, your analysis of this substance will be invaluable. Watson, our next inquiries must take us along the towpaths and among the boatmen. Someone may have seen something unusual. A new line of investigation had clearly opened in my friend's mind. The coxswain's problem was only the first knot in a much more tangled mystery than we first thought. The quiet lapping of the cam against the pilings seemed to echo the unanswered questions, which now hung heavy in the damp air. The perplexing discovery of the viscous substance upon the shell's hull had left me, at least, with more questions than answers. Holmes, however, seemed to positively thrive on such challenges. As we left the subdued, almost hushed, atmosphere of the boathouse, the chill morning air bit at our cheeks. He turned his keen gaze towards the slow-moving waters of the Cam, where the distant cry of a moorhen echoed faintly. I watched as a lone scull cut a silent swathe across its surface, the rhythmic dip of oars a faint, almost melancholic, punctuation in the quiet. The currents of this river carry more than water, Watson, he remarked, his voice crisp. They carry whispers, rumors, and the idle chatter of those who live by its banks. It is there we must dredge for our next catch of facts, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Our path led us along the towpath, a muddy ribbon I knew to be frequented by students and townsfolk alike. The squelch of our boots in the damp earth was a constant accompaniment. The air, I recall, was thick with the scent of that same earth and distant coal smoke, a familiar Cambridge aroma. Indeed, the towpath was a microcosm of Cambridge life. We observed a pair of stout women, their arms laden with laundry baskets, exchanging sharp words with a young delivery boy whose cart had momentarily blocked their path. Further on, a grizzled fisherman, his face like tanned leather, patiently mended his nets, his eyes occasionally flicking towards the river with an air of profound resignation. Even a college porter, identifiable by his formal, if slightly worn, attire, hurried past, his expression one of harried importance. We passed boisterous groups of undergraduates, their college scarves a flash of color against the gray morning, their laughter and shouts echoing briefly as they went by. I noted, too, more solitary figures. A pale-faced student, his nose buried in a book even as he walked, nearly colliding with a lamppost, and an elderly Don, his gait slow and deliberate, who surveyed the river with an air of detached academic interest. It was Holmes who paused by an ancient, weather-beaten public house, the Waterman's Rest. Its windows were clouded with steam, and from within, the low hum of conversation and the distinct clink of tankards spilled out, a rough but perhaps welcoming invitation. As we stepped inside, the heavy aroma of stale beer and pipe tobacco enveloped us. Near the crackling hearth, a group of gruff-looking men, unmistakably boatmen, huddled in conversation, their voices a low, constant rumble. A clock ticked ponderously on the wall. In another corner, two wiry individuals, their conversation hushed and intense, pored over what looked to be a betting slip, their eyes darting about the room. A lone, respectably dressed tradesman sat near the bar, nursing his pint and observing the scene with quiet amusement. Holmes, with an affable nod that always seemed to put people at ease, secured two ales, the tap gurgling as they were drawn, and led me to a quiet corner. His ears, I knew from long experience, would be attuned to the ebb and flow of every conversation, sifting for relevance. Snippets of talk reached my own ears above the general murmur. Complaints about the weather, boasts of past rowing glories, and more pertinently, hushed speculation about the upcoming regatta and the misfortune that had befallen the favored crew. The general sentiment, as expected, is one of surprise and outrage, he murmured after a time, his eyes scanning the room. But specific knowledge is what we seek. There is a fellow I was told frequents these parts, Old Fitz, they call him, a man whose memory is as long as the river itself, observed Sherlock Holmes. Upon our inquiry, the landlord, a portly man whose perpetually wary expression seemed a fixture of his trade, wiped his hands on his apron with a soft, rasping sound. He jerked a thumb towards a stooped figure huddled by a small, grimy window, nursing a clay pipe. This, then, was the old Fitz Holmes sought. His face, I observed, was a veritable road map of wrinkles, etched by countless seasons of sun and wind. Yet his eyes, though clouded, held a spark of shrewd awareness. He looked up with a start as Holmes approached, and I noted the scrape of our chairs on the wooden floor seemed particularly loud in a momentary lull that fell over the nearby conversations. "Don't get many your sort in air. What's your business with old Fitz?" replied old Fitz. "We are merely seeking a little information, my good man," Holmes began, his tone disarmingly mild, "regarding the recent unfortunate incident at the college boathouses. You see a great deal from your vantage point here, I imagine," declared Sherlock Holmes. Fitz grunted, a low sound in his throat, then drew on his pipe. The tobacco crackled softly, a sharp, distinct sound that seemed to fill a momentary silence in the pub. He appeared reluctant to my eye, his gaze flickering towards the door as if he were contemplating escape. Holmes, however, possessed that singular way of commanding attention without overt force. I listened as he spoke of the river, of past regattas, his voice calm and measured. His detailed knowledge evidently surprised the old boatman, and I fancied, coaxed from him a grudging respect. "Seen things, I have," he admitted slowly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Night afore last. Odd folk about. Not your usual students larking. These were older. One or two looked like Dons, right proper scholars, but jumpy they were. Skulking near the boathouses, and then again parking around the new research buildings the college put up by the fen, showing an unhealthy interest if you ask Fitz," replied old Fitz. "Academics, you say, and near the research facilities." Holmes leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tell me, did you observe anything particular about their demeanor or appearance?" deduced Sherlock Holmes. "Kept to the shadows mostly. One was tall, stooped-like, always looking over his shoulder. Another was younger, sharp-faced. Seemed agitated, they did. Not the sort you'd expect to be messing with boats, but definitely interested in what was happening down by the water and what secrets them college buildings held." Old Fitz replied. With a final, cryptic nod, old Fitz fell silent, retreating, it seemed to me, into the labyrinth of his own thoughts. The only sound from him was the gentle puffing at his pipe. Holmes thanked him, his voice clear, and left a generous coin on the table, the clink of metal on wood, a small, sharp sound. We made our way back into the bracing air. As we stepped outside, the familiar sounds of the river, the lapping of water against the banks, the distant call of a gull seemed louder to my ears, carrying, I thought, the distinct echoes of the old man's unsettling words. Academics showing a furtive interest in research facilities and boathouses at unseemly hours, Holmes mused, his pace quickening. This deepens the waters considerably, Watson. The sabotage was timed with precision, likely occurring under the cover of that same night Fitz observed these peculiar individuals. It suggests a motive beyond simple intercollegiate rivalry. Someone with specialized knowledge or a desperate need for it is at play, replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's words, as they so often did, painted a picture far more complex than I had initially conceived, certainly more than a mere undergraduate prank. The wind carried his words away as we walked, but their impact remained. The mention of research facilities, coupled with the sophisticated nature of the sabotage, pointed towards a calculated act, perhaps driven by ambitions that extended far beyond the glory of the regatta. My own mind, thus prompted, immediately began to race. I considered who amongst the university's fiercely competitive circles might possess such motives. Indeed, the image of a certain rival captain, notorious for his desperate ambition, began to loom large in my thoughts, his imagined boasts almost audible in my recollection. Holmes's deductions about the timing of the sabotage were, as ever, remarkably precise. Inevitably, and with some anticipation, I confess, our focus shifted to the most obvious suspect. The human factor, Watson, Holmes had remarked to me only that morning, his eyes glinting with familiar keenness, is often the most stubbornly irrational, yet ultimately the most revealing. We must pay a call upon Mr. Lawrence Pike. The following morning, we made our way to the rival college's boat club. It was a more utilitarian structure than the one we had previously visited. The air inside was heavy with the scent of damp wood, river water, and old canvas. From nearby, the rhythmic creak of oars and sharp shouts of a coxswain drifted through an open window. These sounds were carried on a chill breeze that did little to dispel the tension I felt. Constable Grimshaw, a stout and impassive fellow, accompanied us. His very presence lent an official and somewhat grim weight to our inquiries. We were shown into a cramped office where Mr. Lawrence Pike, captain of the rival crew, awaited us. He was a powerfully built young man with a firm, square jaw. His restless eyes darted about, seeming to assess us minutely, yet they betrayed a certain unease. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low growl. It was an almost animalistic sound that immediately conveyed an undercurrent of defiance. I could see this would be no easy interview. "So, you're the gentleman from the Dilettante Detectives, eh? Come to cast suspicion on us, I suppose. You're wasting your time," replied Mr. Lawrence Pike. Holmes's tone was mild, yet it carried an edge that Pike could not have missed. "We are merely seeking clarity, Mr. Pike. The integrity of the regatta is paramount, is it not? Your whereabouts on the night in question would be most helpful," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Pike leaned back. The chair groaned under his weight. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his clasped hands. It was a small sign, I suspected, of the strain he was under. "I was at the Anchor and Chain public house with my crew until well past 11. Then I returned directly to my lodgings. Anyone will tell you," responded Mr. Lawrence Pike. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Indeed, and your boots, Mr. Pike. They appear to carry traces of a rather specific riverside mud. This mud is quite distinct from the gravel paths leading to the Anchor and Chain or your college. It is more akin, I should venture, to the silt found down by the old commercial wharves," replied Sherlock Holmes. At Holmes's pointed observation, Pike shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier bluster visibly deflated, much like a pricked balloon. Even Constable Grimshaw, who had hitherto remained a silent observer, cleared his throat with a dry, rasping sound, as if acknowledging the hit. I may have taken a stroll later, for some air. My father's shipyard is not far from there. Sometimes I walk that way to clear my head, answered Mr. Lawrence Pike. Holmes inquired, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. Ah, Pike and Sons Shipbuilders. A venerable name, though I hear they have faced some headwinds of late. Rumors abound of a new, experimental keel design. Perhaps they are also working on a revolutionary hull treatment process they hope to perfect. Such innovations, if successful, could indeed change their fortunes, observed Sherlock Holmes. The mention of his family's business seemed to strike a nerve. Pike's face tightened perceptibly. His eyes darted towards the window, much like a cornered animal seeking an escape. As if to underscore the somber turn, a distant boat horn echoed mournfully across the water. He spoke with a sudden, harsh defensiveness. That's just talk, idle gossip. We build good boats, that's all. Winning the regatta would certainly help our reputation, I'll grant you that. We need every advantage, replied Mr. Lawrence Pike. Holmes pressed, his voice once more like steel. An advantage, Mr. Pike, or perhaps a desperate measure to protect a valuable nascent technology. Such technology might be vulnerable to prying eyes or even industrial sabotage if its potential became widely known before it was fully secured, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Pike offered no direct reply to this sharp thrust. He merely stared at my friend with a complex mixture of resentment and dawning apprehension. The air in that small office grew thick. It was heavy with unspoken possibilities and the weight of Holmes's insinuation. A moment of silence stretched tautly between them. Holmes seemed to orchestrate this silence with masterful patience. Then he rose to his feet. Thank you for your time, Mr. Pike, and for your candor, Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes paused. His gaze swept the room, settling on a small, almost invisible smudge on the edge of Pike's desk, a dark, resinous fleck. As we departed, Grimshaw nodding curtly to Pike, Holmes murmured to me, "The currents of this affair, Watson, run deeper and murkier than simple collegiate rivalry. The nature of that sticky substance on the sabotaged hull becomes ever more pertinent. It is time, I believe, for a more scientific examination," observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's final words hung in the air, a clear indication of our next avenue of inquiry. I confess, the prospect of what lay ahead filled me with renewed anticipation. We would be leaving the murky intrigues of boathouses for the more precise and fascinating realm of chemical analysis, a field in which Holmes excelled. Following our disquieting interview with Mr. Pike, Holmes's attention became entirely consumed by the peculiar substance found adhering to the sabotaged shell. Our inquiries led us to the university's chemistry laboratory, a place of pungent odors and the diligent, quiet industry of science. The air within hummed with a low thrum from some unseen apparatus, and the sharp scent of reagents pricked at the nostrils as we entered. Good heavens, Holmes, this laboratory is quite the assault on the senses. One could almost bottle the very air of scientific endeavor in here, responded Dr. John Watson. Miss Alina Whitfield, a young woman whose keen intellect Professor Finch had praised, greeted us. Her laboratory coat was immaculate, and her gaze, direct and intelligent, met Holmes's own without a trace of diffidence. A faint clinking of glassware accompanied her movements as she gestured towards a workbench laden with beakers and phials. Holmes spoke, his tone one of professional courtesy, yet underscored with an eager anticipation. "Miss Whitfield, I presume. Dr. Watson and I are most grateful for your assistance. The sample, I believe, awaits your expert scrutiny," Sherlock Holmes said. Her voice was clear and steady, betraying a quiet confidence. Indeed, Mr. Holmes, I have it here. An intriguing contaminant, to be sure. I have already performed some preliminary tests, Miss Alina Whitfield said. She indicated a small watch glass upon which lay a smear of the dark, viscous material. Holmes leaned closer, his hawk-like features intent. A most peculiar-looking substance, Miss Whitfield. It seems quite out of place on a racing shell, I must say. Dr. John Watson added. Miss Whitfield acknowledged his observation with a slight inclination of her head. The only sounds for a moment were the gentle hiss of a nearby Bunsen burner and the distant chime of the college clock before she began her explanation. Miss Whitfield elaborated, her delivery clear and methodical. The primary components are readily identifiable. Birch tar, quite common, and traces of specific river algae consistent with prolonged immersion in the cam. Nothing especially sinister in those alone, responded Miss Alina Whitfield. Holmes nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the sample. The commonplace often serves to mask the significant, Miss Whitfield. And the third element, I detect something more refined, shall we say, Sherlock Holmes said. A flicker of appreciation crossed Miss Whitfield's face at Holmes's perception. For the next hour, the laboratory hummed with quiet intensity. The clink of glassware, the hiss of heating solutions, and the mingling of acrid chemical scents created a symphony of scientific inquiry. Miss Whitfield worked with a deftness that spoke of long practice, while Holmes observed intently. Your expertise is truly remarkable, Miss Whitfield. This all seems extraordinarily complex to a layman. Dr. John Watson commented. Miss Whitfield offered a brief smile. Thank you, Dr. Watson. It requires meticulous attention, but the chemical principles become familiar with practice. Mr. Holmes, however, your questions cut directly to the core of the matter, Miss Alina Whitfield said. Holmes, indeed, continued to interject with pointed questions that seemed to guide the analysis towards its inevitable conclusion, his focus unwavering. At length, Miss Whitfield straightened up, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Extraordinary, Mr. Holmes, Miss Whitfield exclaimed. As you suspected, this is no common grease. We're dealing with a highly specific industrial lubricant. Its unique properties, the viscosity, the chemical signature, they all point to something quite specialized, responded Miss Alina Whitfield. Holmes's voice was sharp with dawning comprehension, distinctive enough to suggest a particular application, perhaps, not something one would find in any common workshop. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Precisely. This type of lubricant is special, Mr. Holmes. It's used for very precise machines, the kind with delicate parts that have to withstand a lot of force. I have read of similar compounds used in advanced shipbuilding or even experimental boat designs, perhaps for bonding new types of hulls or for complex propeller systems, responded Miss Alina Whitfield. The implications of her words hung heavy in the air, thick as the chemical fumes. Good heavens, Holmes, an industrial lubricant used in advanced shipbuilding, you say? This points rather directly to young Pike's family and their interests, does it not? Asked Dr. John Watson. Indeed, Watson. The pieces begin to align with alarming clarity. This discovery significantly alters the complexion of the case. We must inform Professor Finch at once, Sherlock Holmes said. We conveyed our findings to Professor Finch, who received us in his book-lined study, the gentle rustle of turning pages ceasing as we entered. The atmosphere there was markedly different from the busy laboratory, now heavy with academic gravity. Professor Finch listened intently, his brow furrowed. His voice was grave when he finally spoke. An industrial lubricant, you say? This moves beyond mere undergraduate rivalry, Mr. Holmes. This suggests a calculated act, possibly to gain an illicit advantage related to innovation, said Professor Alastair Finch. Indeed, Professor. The presence of this specific lubricant strongly suggests that the saboteur possessed not only the intent to cripple the boat, but also specialized knowledge. perhaps even access to materials used in the most advanced shipbuilding. It points towards industrial espionage, stealing valuable designs or secrets disguised as a simple sporting misdemeanor. Sherlock Holmes responded. Holmes paced the confines of the study for a moment, the rhythmic tap of his shoes on the polished floorboards the only sound. His gaze was distant, his mind clearly piecing together the disparate threads of the case. Holmes stopped his pacing abruptly. Such specialized knowledge, such a targeted act, this was no mere prank. This speaks of high stakes, Watson. We are looking for an individual with access, with motive, and quite possibly with a desperate need. The sort of need that might arise from pressures far exceeding simple academic ambition, replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's words cast a more sinister light upon the affair. It was clear our investigation must now delve into hidden motives and desperate acts far beneath the surface of university life and competitive sport. The game, as he was fond of saying, was truly afoot, its currents running deeper and darker than we had first supposed. The morning after our enlightening discussion with Miss Whitfield, Holmes convened the Dilettante Detectives Club in a borrowed university common room. The air, usually thick with the scent of old leather and scholarly dust, crackled with nervous energy. From the quadrangle outside, the low murmur of student voices barely penetrated our focused assembly. A tray of half-empty teacups rattled softly as Holmes rose, his lean figure commanding immediate attention. His voice, crisp and devoid of preamble, sliced through the quiet anticipation. Gentlemen, our preliminary investigations have yielded fruit. The substance on the hull, particularly the industrial lubricant, points not to a simple prank, but to a more sophisticated hand. We must now cast our nets wider, Sherlock Holmes said. He paced before the cold fireplace, his gaze sweeping over the eager young faces. I noted young Victor Trevor, his brow furrowed in concentration, amongst them. The scrape of Holmes's shoe on the wooden floor was the loudest sound for a moment. Mr. Davies, you and Mr. Carruthers will make discreet inquiries at the local bookmakers. Focus upon Mr. Lawrence Pike, but do not neglect any unusual wagering patterns amongst other members of either crew. Financial desperation is a powerful accelerant. Davies, a stout lad with a surprisingly keen mind, nodded. His reply was a low, determined murmur. "We shall be thorough, Mr. Holmes," Davies said. Holmes continued, his tone sharpening slightly. "Victor, your task is more delicate," observed Sherlock Holmes. He paused, ensuring Trevor's full attention. "I require you to delve into the academic undercurrents. Specifically, ascertain if any Dans or advanced students in hydrodynamics or material science are facing undue pressures. Focus on those whose research relates to advanced boat building. Listen for whispers of attempts to illicitly acquire proprietary research. The design of the sabotaged shell is, I suspect, of particular interest." Victor Trevor nodded, his voice earnest as he replied. "I understand, sir. There are certain rivalries, and talk of some very new hull composite theories being explored in Professor Armitage's laboratory," answered Victor Trevor, acknowledging Trevor's information with a thoughtful expression. Holmes then addressed the remaining pair. "Precisely. And finally, Mr. Finch Minor and Mr. Blackwood, you will investigate the procurement of specialized chemicals and lubricants. Follow the trail suggested by Miss Whitfield's analysis. Note any unusual orders or clandestine meetings near the university research laboratories. Report back here by dusk," observed Sherlock Holmes. With his instructions delivered, the young men dispersed. Their footsteps echoed briefly in the hallway before the heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving Holmes and myself in the suddenly quiet room. The distant chime of a college clock marked the passing hour. It was late afternoon when the first of our amateur investigators returned, his face flushed with a mixture of excitement and gravity. Davies was the first to report. He confirmed that Lawrence Pike was indeed heavily indebted to several bookmakers, his losses mounting with each unsuccessful race. More disconcertingly, Davies added, 2 rowers from the targeted crew also carried significant gambling debts. Holmes listened to Davies' report, then mused, tapping his fingers together. Motive and leverage, Watson. A man in Pike's position might be driven to desperate measures to secure a win, or others could be coerced. Sherlock Holmes said. Shortly thereafter, Victor Trevor arrived, his expression grave. He had confirmed unsettling rumors regarding academic pressures. Professor Armitage, a leading mind in hydrodynamic efficiencies and experimental hull materials, had apparently been approached by an unknown party. This party offered a substantial sum for access to his latest, unpublished research directly applicable to the unique design of the targeted racing shell. Professor Armitage had refused, but the pressure, Trevor intimated, was considerable. There were also whispers of a junior researcher in his department acting secretively, possibly tempted by such offers. Lowering his voice, Trevor continued his report to Holmes. Furthermore, Holmes, there was an unexplained fire in a subsidiary archive where some of Armitage's older, foundational schematics were stored just last month. It was dismissed as accidental at the time, said Victor Trevor. Before Holmes could comment on Trevor's news, Finch Minor and Blackwood entered. They brought information regarding suspicious chemical acquisitions. They had traced a recent, unusually large order of a specific industrial solvent to a discreet address near the engineering labs. This solvent, capable of breaking down certain resins used in experimental boat construction, was purchased under an assumed name. Additionally, they reported seeing a shadowy figure meeting with a lab assistant known for his loose tongue and tighter purse strings. This clandestine meeting occurred not far from where the new hull materials were often tested. Holmes listened intently as Finch Minor and Blackwood concluded, his eyes gleaming. Excellent work, gentlemen. The threads are beginning to weave a rather ugly tapestry. We have financial desperation, academic rivalry escalating towards industrial espionage, and the means to effect subtle, yet devastating, sabotage. The lubricant, the hull design, the specific pressures. It all points to a calculated effort to steal or discredit innovation, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He rose and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening Cambridge streets. Gas lamps were beginning to flicker to life, their glow casting long shadows, and the sounds of the city were mellowing into the evening hum. He turned from the window, his voice firm as he delivered his assessment. Our saboteur is not merely a disgruntled student. They are resourceful, knowledgeable, and likely believe their tracks are covered. However, their actions betray a pattern, a reliance on specific locations and materials. It is time, I believe, to observe the boathouses more closely. If they sought to ensure their handiwork remains effective, or perhaps to retrieve something, tonight might provide an opportunity, Sherlock Holmes said. His gaze met mine, sharp and resolute. Watson, a vigil is in order. The chill of the late Cambridge night bit keenly as Holmes, young Mr. Strachan, Constable Grimshaw, and I took up our positions. Following the unsettling revelations from our fellow dilettantes, Holmes had insisted upon this vigil. Damp earth and river weeds scented the air, mingling with a faint, tarry aroma from the boathouses. A low mist curled from the cam, obscuring the far bank. Holmes's voice was a low murmur, yet each word distinct. The saboteur, having failed to entirely cripple the primary shell, may yet return. Not for the boat itself, perhaps, but for the very intellect that conceived its design. We watch the shed where the new material samples and design schematics are kept. Sherlock Holmes responded. Mr. Strachan, the coxswain, shifted beside me, his coat rustling faintly, betraying his tension. Constable Grimshaw, a sturdy, unimaginative fellow, stood like a statue, gazing at the dark bulk of the boathouses. Only the gentle lapping of water against the pilings and a distant college clock broke the silence. Strachan whispered, his breath clouding in the cold air, "If anyone approaches, I shall know it." "This is my ground," answered Mr. James Strachan. Time stretched. The moon crawled across the inky sky, its silvery light casting long, distorted shadows. These shadows danced and shifted with the breeze, playing tricks upon the eye. I startled at an owl's hoot or a fish's sudden splash. Holmes, however, remained utterly still, a silhouette of patience. Then a subtle change. Not a sound, but a deepening shadow near the designated shed. A cloaked, indistinct figure detached itself from the wall's gloom. My heart hammered. The intruder moved with stealthy confidence towards the shed door, a soft scuff of a boot on the towpath, the only betrayal of its presence. Holmes's voice, barely audible, sliced through the silence. "Now, Grimshaw, be ready," remarked Sherlock Holmes. We heard a faint metallic click, an attempt on the lock. Holmes sprang forward with astonishing speed, a dark shape uncoiling. Holmes cried, his voice sharp and commanding, "Hold there!" The figure whirled. In the moonlight, I glimpsed a pale, startled face before it turned and fled. The chase was on. Our boots thudded on the riverbank, the pursued a mere wraith ahead, moving with uncanny familiarity, dodging mooring posts and branches. The splash of oars echoed briefly as he rowed furiously, vanishing into the river mist. We stood panting on the bank, the sound of his escape fading into the night. Holmes spoke, his breathing steadying, a note of grim satisfaction in his tone. He sought the plans, just as I surmised. "This is no mere undergraduate prank, Watson. The stakes are far higher," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Holmes knelt by the shed door, examining the scratches around the lock with his pocket lens. He picked up something small and dark from the ground. A button, unique in its design, apparently torn off in the flight. "Our quarry was swift and knew the river well," Holmes mused, turning the button over in his fingers. "But this tells a small tale of its own. We need more than shadows and supposition now. We require eyes that have watched this river for a lifetime, eyes that miss nothing of its comings and goings." Sherlock Holmes noted. I knew at once to whom he referred. The eccentric old boatman Fitz, whose knowledge of the Cam and its denizens was legendary. The night's chase, though frustrating, had yielded a vital clue and a clear path forward. Our investigation was drawing closer to the conspiracy's heart. The damp chill of early morning clung to us as we returned from our fruitless chase. The moon, a pale disk in the lightning sky, offered little cheer. Our quarry had vanished into the maze of alleys near the wharves. Yet Holmes's ardor remained undimmed. A new resolve settled upon his sharp features. Holmes's voice was crisp, cutting through the quiet lapping of water against the nearby quay. "Our spectral visitor eluded us, Watson, but he has inadvertently tightened the net. His very presence confirms our suspicions about the boathouse. We must speak with old Fitz again, and this time I fancy he will be more forthcoming," remarked Sherlock Holmes. An hour later, after a hasty breakfast, we again approached the dilapidated shack old Fitz called home. The tang of brine and river mud was strong, punctuated by a distant gull's mournful cry. The shack itself seemed to groan under the wind's persistent caress. Its timbers were weathered and salt-stained. Holmes called out, his tone firm yet not unkind, as he rapped upon the ill-fitting door. "Mr. Fitzwilliam," deduced Sherlock Holmes. A shuffling sound came from within, followed by the scraping of a bolt. The old boatman appeared, his eyes, like chips of sea glass, regarding us with suspicion. The scent of stale tobacco and something vaguely fishy emanated from the gloom behind him. Old Fitz's voice was a low rasp, like shingle dragged by an undertow. "Back again, are ye? Thought I told ye all I knew," old Fitz replied. Holmes replied smoothly, "Indeed, but events have transpired, Mr. Fitzwilliam, which lend new weight to your previous observations." Someone was, in fact, lurking near the boathouses last night. Your sighting was no mere fancy, Sherlock Holmes noted. A flicker of something relief, perhaps, or vindication passed across the old man's face. He grunted, then gestured curtly with a calloused hand. Aye, well, come in then. Don't want the whole river listening, old Fitz said. He shuffled aside, and we entered the cramped, dimly lit interior. There's more than just student mischief afoot, if you ask me. Been seeing things for weeks now, upriver mostly, said old Fitz. Holmes settled himself upon an overturned crate, his gaze intent. I remained standing, the low ceiling compelling me to stoop slightly. The only sounds were the shack's creak and a distant, rhythmic thud. It might have been a pile driver from industrial works further upstream. Fitz continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. Them new works past the bend. Smell strange things comes from there sometimes, on the ebb tide. And men, city types in smart coats, I've seen 'em. Meeting on the quiet with gentlemen from the colleges, said old Fitz. Holmes prompted, his voice keen. Academics, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Aye, one I seen regular, a younger sort, always scribbling in a book. Another older with a nervous twitch. They'd be down by the water near that newfangled hull, talking low with businessmen. Money passing, morn once. And young Pike from the other college, the one with sharp elbows in a race, seen him watching them. Skulking, he was, like a fox near a hen coop, answered old Fitz. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. The pieces were beginning to coalesce. There was the upstream industry and the secretive meetings. Certain academics were involved, perhaps those needing research funds or harboring professional jealousies. And now, a potential link to Pike. Holmes stated, his voice resonating with quiet intensity. This is of the utmost importance, Mr. Fitzwilliam. These businesslike figures, did you notice anything particular about their vessel or their habits? Stated Sherlock Holmes. He rasped. They used a small, dark launch, no markings. Always came and went near dusk or when the fog was thick. And the smell from upstream, sometimes sharp, like new tar, but different, remarked old Fitz. Holmes rose, a thoughtful expression on his face. He murmured more to himself than to me. The tar-like substance on the hull, Watson, and the upstream works. There is a thread here, a definite thread, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. We thanked the old boatman. Our token of appreciation brought a rare smile to his weathered face. As we walked back towards the college, city sounds began to stir. Holmes was unusually silent for a time, then stopped. He declared, Miss Whitfield, her chemical expertise may shed light on this peculiar aroma Fitz described. It could well be connected to our mysterious adhesive. We must consult her at once. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. We found Miss Elena Whitfield in the sunlit quiet of the college library, a formidable tome open before her. She looked up as we approached, her intelligent eyes questioning. Miss Whitfield, your analytical skills are required. We have reason to believe a certain industrial process upstream may be linked to the substance found upon the sabotaged shell. An old boatman described a peculiar odor, sometimes sharp, akin to tar, but distinct. Does this suggest anything to your scientific mind? Miss Whitfield listened intently. A slight frown of concentration appeared on her brow. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle rustle of turning pages from other library patrons. When she spoke, her voice was clear and thoughtful. Each word was chosen with care. Your description, Mr. Holmes, is most intriguing chemically. One might consider coal tar distillates, or perhaps certain polymerizing resins. This is especially true if their preparation was, shall we say, less than refined. Such compounds could show the adhesive qualities you mention. To narrow the field, more details about this upstream manufactory would be invaluable. Or, even better, could a sample of this aroma be procured for analysis? Answered Miss Elena Whitfield. Excellent, Miss Whitfield. Your insight is invaluable, explained Sherlock Holmes. He turned to me, a spark of anticipation in his eyes. Watson, the time has come. We must gather the dilettante detectives. With Fitz's testimony and Miss Whitfield's potential analysis, I believe we are on the verge of piecing this puzzle together, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Bringing our scattered clues together into a clear picture was an invigorating prospect. The boatman's tale had opened new avenues. The shadows around the Regatta Sabotage seemed at last to be receding. The revelations gleaned from old Fitz concerning those furtive meetings by the boathouses and the shadowy businessmen lent a fresh urgency to our investigation. Holmes, his eyes bright with a keen, predatory light, lost no time in summoning the members of our Dilettante Detectives Club. We gathered that same evening in our familiar meeting room, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of old paper, the usual cheerful hubbub replaced by a more somber attentiveness. A chill draught snaked beneath the door, causing the gas lamps to flicker momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, the threads begin to coalesce. Mr. Pike's desperation, already established, now finds itself in curious proximity to certain academic figures, individuals, according to our informant, not averse to clandestine discussion with commercial interests, replied Sherlock Holmes. A murmur ran through the assembled group. Miss Whitfield, ever precise, leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had spent the better part of the day completing her analysis of the viscous substance found upon the sabotaged hull. Her tone, when she spoke, was clear and steady. Indeed, Mr. Holmes, the compound is complex, a resinous base mixed with a metallic powder designed to increase friction subtly, yet significantly, under stress. Its preparation would require not insignificant chemical knowledge and access to a well-equipped laboratory, remarked Miss Elena Whitfield. At that moment, a polite cough announced the arrival of Professor Alastair Finch, his expression serious. He carried a slim portfolio under his arm, the leather worn smooth with age. The floorboards creaked a welcome as he stepped further into the room. Professor Finch, a man whose own study was a testament to his scholarly life. I had visited it once and recalled vividly the tall windows overlooking a quiet college court, the scent of old vellum and beeswax, and the sheer volume of knowledge contained within. Bookshelves reached the ceiling, laden with works on classical literature, local history, and the natural sciences, particularly the botany of the fens. His desk, though piled with papers and specimens, possessed an underlying order. It was a room that breathed intellectual rigor and quiet contemplation, a stark contrast to the murky affair we were investigating. He addressed Holmes, his voice measured. Your summons was most intriguing, Holmes. When you mentioned certain names, I made discreet inquiries from my rooms. It appears two of our colleagues, one from chemistry, another from engineering, have recently displayed expenditures, rather exceeding their stipends. Both possess the expertise Miss Whitfield describes, and crucially, access to the very workshops where the new hull designs were pioneered, replied Professor Alastair Finch. Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping across our faces. Rising from his chair, he began to pace before the fireplace. The rhythmic tap of his heels on the wooden floor was the only sound for a moment, punctuated by the distant clatter of a passing hansom. He stopped his pacing, turning to us, his voice resonating with conviction as he began to lay out his conclusions. And there, my friends, is the crux of it. This is no mere undergraduate rivalry. The oarlocks, tampered with precision, the substance, requiring specific formulation, these point to a calculated, knowledgeable hand, observed Sherlock Holmes. He paused, ensuring his words struck home. Then, his tone hardening, he continued his explanation. Mr. Pike, desperate to win, becomes the desperate tool in this affair. But the true architects, I believe, are those within the university itself, individuals driven by greed, perhaps by professional jealousy, to exploit their positions. Sherlock Holmes noted. A low murmur of shock rippled through the room at this accusation. Holmes, however, pressed on, his eyes glinting as he neared his final point. They provided the means for the sabotage, yes, but their greater crime, I submit, was to facilitate the theft of intellectual property, the revolutionary hull design itself. For those shadowy, industrialists old Fitz observed, it is a twofold conspiracy. Sabotage for the race, espionage for the profit. A stunned silence fell upon the room. The implications of Holmes's deduction were far-reaching, transforming a simple act of sabotage into a complex web of academic corruption and industrial espionage. The low hum of the city outside seemed to underscore the gravity of the conspiracy we had uncovered within these hallowed university walls. "Good heavens, Holmes!" I exclaimed, the full scope of the villainy dawning upon me. "Then Pike is but a pawn in a much larger, more sinister game?" asked Dr. John Watson. A grim smile touched Holmes's lips as he regarded me. "Precisely, Watson. And now that we see the full board, it is time to arrange our own pieces. The regatta is almost upon us, and I believe we can contrive a most illuminating reception for those who believe their designs have remained hidden," deduced Sherlock Holmes. His words, though spoken softly, carried an undeniable current of resolve. I looked at his animated face, the familiar gleam of the hunt in his eyes, and knew that the unraveling of this tangled skein was far from over. Indeed, the most dangerous part was yet to come. The weight of our discoveries from the previous evening hung heavy in the air, permeating every corner of our Cambridge lodgings like an invisible fog. The web of academic jealousy, gambling debts, and audacious industrial espionage was far more tangled than any of us in the Dilettante Detectives Club had initially conceived. The impending regatta, far from being a simple university competition, represented the pinnacle of collegiate honor and a fierce battleground for academic prestige. Its outcome would echo through the ancient quads for months, if not years, to come. The very thought that such a revered tradition could be so maliciously targeted added another layer to the grim affair. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated by the complexity, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. He paced before the fireplace, the rhythmic tap of his shoes on the floorboards the only sound for a long moment, save for the occasional crackle from the hearth. His voice, when he finally spoke, was crisp and decisive. "Gentlemen and Miss Whitfield, the time for piecing together is past. Now we must act. We shall set a snare for our quarry, one they will find irresistible," declared Sherlock Holmes. "A trap, Holmes?" I asked, my practical nature surfacing. "They've shown themselves to be remarkably cunning. What precisely makes this particular snare so irresistible to them?" Dr. John Watson inquired. Mr. Strachan, the coxswain, clearly sharing some of my apprehension, sat rigidly on the edge of his chair, the faint creak of the wood under his shifting weight betraying his tension, his knuckles white as he gripped its arms. Miss Whitfield, by contrast, leaned forward, her intelligent gaze fixed on Holmes, awaiting his elucidation. His voice was tight, strained with anxiety. "My boat, Holmes. You mean to use the Phoenix again?" remarked Mr. James Strachan. "Precisely, Mr. Strachan. The Phoenix it must be." He met my gaze. "And as to its irresistibility, Watson, that lies in their arrogance and the perceived flawlessness of their initial work. The repairs, as I understand from Miss Whitfield's excellent assessment, are undetectable to the casual eye. The saboteurs, particularly those with a vested interest in the hull's design, will be compelled to ensure their work was either thorough or, if they suspect discovery, to attempt a more definitive act before the regatta. They will expect it to be under guard, naturally, but we shall provide an opportunity that appears fortuitous," observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes then outlined his stratagem in greater detail, his voice a low murmur against the backdrop of the crackling fire. "The Phoenix, ostensibly repaired and ready for the race, would be returned to its usual berth in the boathouse. We, along with a discreet police presence, would lie in wait. The critical element, as Holmes emphasized, his finger tapping the mantelpiece for emphasis, was to make the trap appear an unforeseen opportunity for the culprits, not a blatant lure. Miss Whitfield nodded, her expression analytical. It is a sound hypothesis, Mr. Holmes. Should the perpetrators operate under the assumption that their initial efforts were either undetected or misinterpreted, perhaps as an inconsequential mishap or mere undergraduate folly, their compulsion to verify the sabotage's efficacy, or indeed to compound it, would be considerable, especially if, as the evidence of the specialized lubricant suggests, the objective extends to industrial advantage, said Miss Elena Whitfield. Indeed, Miss Whitfield, their arrogance or desperation will be their undoing. We must rely on their underestimation of our resolve. He turned to me. Watson, you and I shall manage the observation from within the adjoining storage room. Mr. Strachan, you will appear to make a final check of your vessel late in the evening, then depart, making it clear you believe all is secure. Miss Whitfield, your role in identifying the substance was pivotal. Tonight, your keen observation will again be invaluable should any unforeseen technicalities arise, observed Sherlock Holmes. I nodded, my hand instinctively checking the reassuring weight of my service revolver, a constant companion on such ventures. We shall be ready, Holmes. Though I must confess, the prospect of a long, cramped vigil in a dusty boathouse storeroom has a certain familiar ring to it. Let us hope this particular watch proves more immediately fruitful than some of our past nocturnal enterprises, remarked Dr. John Watson. Holmes offered a rare, thin smile at my remark, a fleeting warmth that vanished as quickly as it appeared, his features settling back into their usual intense focus. Later that afternoon, we arrived at the constabulary. The air hung thick with the smell of damp wool and official ink. Tick-tock, tick-tock. A large clock on the wall counted out the seconds as Constable Grimshaw, stout and perpetually skeptical, listened to Holmes's request with growing reluctance. He grunted, his voice a low rumble. Lurking in a boathouse, Mr. Holmes. On the off chance these university rascals return, it seems a thin prospect, Constable Grimshaw said. Constable, this is no mere undergraduate prank. We are dealing with individuals who have demonstrated a capacity for significant criminal enterprise, a conspiracy that threatens the very foundations of fair competition. The evidence we have compiled points to a conspiracy that extends far beyond the riverbanks. Your presence will be essential not merely for apprehension, but as a clear statement of the law's vigilance, Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes's quiet conviction, and perhaps a hint of the larger forces at play, eventually swayed the constable, who gave a reluctant nod. He agreed to deploy 2 of his plain-clothed men to strategic positions outside the boathouse, ready to move upon our signal, a sharp whistle. As dusk began to settle, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the college greens, we reconvened at the boathouse. The gentle lapping of the cam against the wooden pilings and the mournful, distant calls of waterfowl were the predominant sounds, a peaceful counterpoint to our tense anticipation. Inside, the air was cool and smelt sharply of river damp and fresh varnish. Mr. Strachan, pale but resolute, went through the motions of securing the phoenix, his movements precise despite the tremor I detected in his hands. He murmured more to himself than to us, his voice barely audible above the gentle creak of the boathouse structure. "She's ready. Let them come," remarked Mr. James Strachan. With Strachan departed, his footsteps fading on the wooden walkway outside, Holmes, Miss Whitfield, and I secreted ourselves in the cramped, dusty storage room adjoining the main boat bay. The air was thick with the smell of old rope and dried river mud. Through a carefully arranged gap in the planking, We had a clear view of the prized shell, gleaming faintly in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the gloom. The minutes stretched into an hour, each one feeling like an eternity. The silence within our hiding place was profound, broken only by the occasional, unnerving scurrying of a rat in the walls and the distant, solemn chime of a college clock marking the late hour. The trap was set. All that remained was the waiting, a taut, silent vigil. The air along the cam thrummed with a nervous energy, a stark contrast, I confess, to the grim anticipation that had settled upon Holmes, Constable Grimshaw, and myself. Banners flapped in the crisp breeze, and the distant strains of a brass band drifted over the water, a cheerful sound that seemed almost mocking given our purpose. We had positioned ourselves, as per Holmes's meticulous plan, within sight of the St. Augustine's boathouse, now an unwitting stage for the drama about to unfold. The murmur of the festive crowd was a constant backdrop, punctuated by the occasional splash of an oar as crews made their final preparations further downriver. Holmes, his gaze fixed upon the boathouse entrance, was a study in coiled stillness. Hours seemed to pass, marked only by the shifting shadows and the ebb and flow of voices from the towpath. Then, as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of violet and grey, he stiffened. A low whistle, barely audible above the general hum, escaped his lips. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, sharp command. "They come, Watson." "Just as predicted. Grimshaw, be ready," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I followed his line of sight. Three figures, cloaked against the evening chill, moved with a furtive haste towards the boathouse. One was unmistakably Mr. Lawrence Pike, his distinctive, somewhat bullish gait giving him away even in the dim light. The other two were less familiar, though one bore the stoop of an academic, the other the sharp, watchful air of a city man. The creak of the boathouse door, protesting as it was forced, echoed faintly across the water. At Holmes's signal, we advanced, our footsteps muffled by the grassy bank. Grimshaw and his two plainclothes officers fanned out, their movements economical and precise. We entered the boathouse to find the trio huddled around the damaged shell, a lantern casting long, dancing shadows that made their faces appear grotesque. Pike held a small vial, his companions observing intently. Holmes's voice, clear and resonant, cut through the musty air of the boathouse. "An interesting little gathering, Mr. Pike. Might one inquire as to your renewed interest in St. Augustine's unfortunate vessel?" Pike whirled, his face a mask of fury and then dawning horror as he recognized Holmes. The vial slipped from his grasp, shattering on the wooden floor with a small, sharp sound, its contents spreading in a dark, viscous pool. His companions recoiled, one uttering a choked gasp. Pike sputtered, his voice rising an octave as he found it, hoarse and laced with a desperate, blustering bravado. "Holmes, what is the meaning of this intrusion?" "I am merely inspecting the damage," replied Mr. Lawrence Pike. Holmes merely raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping to Pike's companions. "Inspecting, or perhaps attempting to remove evidence of your handiwork, Mr. Pike? Or could it be that your associates here were keen to acquire a more intimate understanding of its unique hull design before it is repaired?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. The academic, a pale man with spectacles, began to tremble visibly, his breath coming in short, audible gasps. The city man, however, maintained a steely composure, the soft rustle of his clothing betraying only the slightest tension as his eyes darted towards any possible escape. Holmes continued, his tone becoming almost conversational, yet with an underlying edge of steel that was unmistakable. "The scheme was audacious, I grant you. Mr. Pike, your family's shipbuilding business is in a precarious state, is it not? A powerful motive to seek an unfair advantage," stated Sherlock Holmes. Pike glowered but offered no reply, his earlier bravado deflating under Holmes's steady gaze. "You sought not just to win the regatta, but to steal the innovative design of this shell. A desperate measure, certainly, deduced Sherlock Holmes. But for the sabotage itself and the understanding of its construction, you required specific expertise. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He turned his attention to the academic, whose trembling had intensified under the scrutiny. Professor, your knowledge of advanced adhesives and structural weaknesses proved invaluable, I surmise. Was it the lure of research funding, or perhaps the chance to settle an old professional score that led you to assist Mr. Pike? Remarked Sherlock Holmes. The academic could only manage a choked sound, his spectacles misting as he wrung his hands, seemingly paralyzed by the direct accusation. Holmes's gaze then shifted to the third man. Despite his earlier darting eyes, the fellow now met the detective's stare with a newfound, if reluctant, steadiness. And then, to broker the sale of these stolen designs. That required a different sort of specialist, did it not? Our silent associate here, an agent for a rival firm, I presume. One eager to profit from a timely piece of industrial espionage. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The city man, his composure largely intact, offered a slight, almost imperceptible shrug, a silent acknowledgment of a well-played hand against him. Constable Grimshaw, his jaw set and his gaze unwavering, stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was as steady and resolute as his bearing, leaving no room for argument. Mr. Lawrence Pike, and you two associates, I am hereby placing you under arrest for conspiracy, sabotage, and attempted theft. You will accompany me to the station. Let's have no trouble, Constable Grimshaw answered. It was a swift, and for them, ignominious end. There was no resistance. Pike seemed to visibly deflate, all the bluster gone from him in an instant. The academic wrung his hands, muttering incoherently, while the industrial agent merely gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, as if accepting an unfortunate but calculated business loss. As they were led away, the sounds of the distant festivities seemed to grow louder, a poignant counterpoint, I thought, to the squalid ambition laid bare within the shadowed boathouse. The sharp scent of the spilled chemical still hung in the air. Holmes surveyed the scene, a flicker of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. A sordid affair, Watson, born of desperation and greed, yet every thread now accounted for. The university will have much to discuss, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Indeed, I reflected, the repercussions of this night's work would ripple through the hallowed halls of Cambridge for some time to come. Our own duties, however, were not yet concluded. There would be formal statements, the meticulous unraveling of the finer details for the constabulary, and then, perhaps, the quiet satisfaction of a complex case brought to its just conclusion. Thick with a quiet tension, the days immediately following the unraveling of the Regatta Sabotage permeated the very stones of the university. Constables moved with discreet purpose about the grounds, their presence a sober reminder of the affair's gravity. Whispers, once carrying speculation, now conveyed a mixture of shock, and in some quarters, grudging respect for the swiftness with which Holmes had brought the conspiracy to light. With the industrial spies and their academic confederates in custody, Mr. Pike, his ambitions dashed, awaited the authorities' judgment. Slowly, as if a storm had finally passed, the air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and old learning, began to clear. A day or so later, Holmes and I found ourselves within Professor Alistair Finch's familiar study. In the hearth, a cheerful fire crackled, its warmth a stark contrast to the grey light filtering through leaded panes. Even the usual clutter of books and papers seemed to possess a new order, as if reflecting the university's own restored integrity. A most commendable undertaking, Mr. Holmes, and successfully concluded. You have not merely addressed a criminal matter, you have laid bare a canker, a moral frailty threatening the very foundations of our academic community. Professor Alistair Finch answered. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed upon the dancing flames. Ambition, Professor, is a double-edged oar. In the right hands, it propels one to victory. Misguided, as we have witnessed, it leads only to foundering, declared Sherlock Holmes. Quite so. The relentless pursuit of preeminence, that burning desire to eclipse one's peers, it can impose a formidable weight. Young Pike, his family standing in peril, one might almost feel a pang of sympathy were his transgressions not so profoundly reprehensible. Professor Alastair Finch answered. Holmes's eyes flickered towards a heavily annotated volume on the professor's desk. Your Marcus Aurelius, I observe, has seen recent, frequent consultation, Professor. Its spine is more yielding than its neighbors. Perhaps you too have been contemplating the nature of honor and the right conduct in adversity, observed Sherlock Holmes. Finch smiled faintly, a touch of surprise in his expression, then chuckled softly. You miss nothing, do you, Holmes? Indeed, the old Stoic has been a comfort. It gladdens me to see your generation still capable of such ethical rigor and such razor-sharp deduction, remarked Professor Alastair Finch. Crisp and bright, the day of the regatta dawned. Across the cam's surface, a fresh breeze skipped, ruffling flags and banners adorning boathouses and bridges. Crowds, as dense as ever, flowed like a river of humanity along the banks. Yet the atmosphere felt different. Subdued were the usual raucous betting calls, replaced now by a genuine excitement for the contest itself. Near the finish line, I spotted Miss Whitfield and several other members of our Dilettante Detectives Club, their faces animated with anticipation. While the crews prepared, my gaze fell upon Mr. Strachan, the coxswain whose shell had been targeted. Catching Holmes's eye, he offered a curt, respectful nod. His gaze held intensity, yes, but it was the fire of competition, not the lingering shadow of suspicion. Holmes, good to see you. Today it's about the race itself. Clean water, a straight course for all. May the best blades take the cup, said Mr. James Strachan. That, Mr. Strachan, is precisely the spirit of the endeavor, stated Sherlock Holmes. The starter's pistol cracked, its echo racing across the water. A roar erupted from the crowd as the shells surged forward. Oars flashed in unison, accompanied by the rhythmic creak of oarlocks and the urgent cries of coxswains. Fiercely contested, the race saw every stroke delivered with power and precision. No mishaps, no hint of foul play marred the event, only the honest exertion of well-trained athletes. As the winning crew crossed the line, the cheers erupting were as much for sportsmanship as for victory itself. Holmes observed the scene, his keen eyes absorbing every detail. You see, Watson, the desire to win is potent, certainly, but it is the manner of winning that defines the man, and indeed the institution. Today, honor has been truly restored to the cam. Walking back through cheering throngs, we heard celebratory bells pealing from a nearby college chapel, their sound drifting on the breeze. Within the university, Holmes's already formidable reputation had taken on a new dimension. He was seen not merely as a solver of puzzles, but as a restorer of integrity. With the riddle of the Regatta Sabotage closed, I harbored little doubt that other, equally perplexing challenges would soon find their way to my extraordinary friend.